We rest easy believing our identities are permanent. Yet countless families endure the quiet terror of a loved one who vanished, frozen as a nameless sketch in a dusty police archive. But what happens when the silence of 50 years is shattered by a single strand of ancestral code? Can the dead finally point a finger at those who believed they got away? On December 20th, 1976, a biting winter wind sweeps across the frozen banks of the Lehigh River in White Haven, Pennsylvania. A local teenager navigates the rugged terrain beneath an old steel bridge. The dull gray sky casts long shadows over the frost-covered ground. Tucked against the desolate riverbank, 3 identical weather-beaten suitcases sit abandoned in the brush. The teenager approaches the mysterious luggage. A frayed zipper gives way, revealing a grim discovery that halts the young observer in their tracks. Inside the cramped confines of the discarded cases rest the altered remains of a young woman who carried an unborn child. The local authorities rush to secure the perimeter of the frost-bitten riverbank. Law enforcement officers string yellow tape across the desolate landscape, unaware that decades will pass before anyone speaks the true name of the victim inside the luggage. The mid-1970s bring a distinct rhythm to the bustling avenues of Jersey City, New Jersey. Dense rows of brick, tenement buildings stand shoulder to shoulder along the crowded pavement. Wrought iron fire escapes cast grid like shadows over the cracked, concrete sidewalks below. The scent of roasted pork and fried plantains drifts from open apartment windows into the humid summer air. Within this vibrant Puerto Rican enclave lives 15-year-old Evelyn Cullen. Evelyn navigates her formative years surrounded by a sprawling, protective family network. Relatives fill the cramped rooms of their apartment with constant conversation and shared meals. Her parents maintain a strict but loving household, attempting to shield their children from the harsher elements of the urban landscape. Evelyn possesses a bright, trusting demeanor that draws people into her orbit. Friends recall her warm smile and her deep desire to build a meaningful life of her own. She spends her afternoons walking down the vibrant neighborhood streets, taking in the sounds of distant radios playing salsa music on the corner. The local community watches her grow from a quiet child into a spirited teenager with a distinct sense of independence. Her loved ones cherish her presence, envisioning a future filled with traditional milestones and family gatherings. No one anticipates the profound darkness waiting past the borders of their close-knit neighborhood. The rhythm of Evelyn's daily routine shifts when she encounters a young man named Luis Sierra. Sierra presents himself as a quiet, unassuming figure blending into the familiar background of their neighborhood blocks. He maneuvers through the local streets with an air of calm authority that masks his underlying intentions. Evelyn finds herself captivated by his attention, stepping away from the protective umbrella of her childhood home. Their dynamic escalates from casual street corner conversations to a serious, defining relationship. The teenage girl invests her heart into the connection, believing she has found a partner to share her budding aspirations. The physical geography of their romance remains confined to the narrow alleys and concrete stoops of their Jersey City district. Tensions rise within the Corlin household when Evelyn discovers she is carrying a child. The news of the pregnancy sends shockwaves through her traditional family, testing the boundaries of their cultural expectations. Despite the initial friction, her parents accept the reality of the situation, prioritizing the well-being of their daughter and her unborn baby. Evelyn views the impending arrival of her child as a gateway to adulthood, embracing the enormous responsibility ahead with quiet grace. Sierra stands by her side during these turbulent weeks, projecting the image of a committed father-to-be. The young couple begins planning a life together under the watchful eyes of the community. Seeking independence, Evelyn and Louise pack their belongings and secure a modest apartment of their own. The new residence sits a few blocks away from the Colon family home, separated by a brief walk past familiar bodegas and corner markets. This minimal physical distance provides her parents with a deep sense of comfort and security. They watch their teenage daughter transition into a domestic routine, managing a household while preparing for motherhood. Evelyn maintains steady communication with her relatives. She steps through the heavy wooden door of her parents' home for frequent visits. The scent of home-cooked rice and beans fills the air during these regular reunions, reinforcing the unshakable bond between the generations. Her mother examines the growing swell of Evelyn's stomach, offering advice and passing down baby clothes saved from previous years. The family registers no alarming red flags, viewing Sierra as a standard young provider. The young woman seems to navigate the monumental leap into adulthood with purpose. Her parents assume she is resting safe inside the walls of her neighboring apartment on the nights she does not visit. The illusion of a peaceful developing family life settles over the entire neighborhood. This comforting facade masks a chilling reality taking shape behind closed doors. The protective barrier of the tight-knit community begins to fracture in the final months of the year 1976. The bitter chill of winter descends upon Jersey City in the late months of the year 1976. Frost coats the iron railings of the tenement fire escapes as the residents retreat into their heated apartments. Inside the Colon household, a sense of anxious anticipation builds regarding Evelyn and her impending due date. The physical visits from the pregnant teenager begin to taper off as the harsh weather sets in. Instead of a knock at the door, the family receives a piece of mail that alters the course of their lives forever. A crisp white envelope arrives in their metal mailbox addressed to her parents. Inside the envelope rests a handwritten letter penned in Spanish. The author of the message delivers monumental news to the awaiting family members. The ink on the page assures her mother and father that Evelyn has given birth to a healthy baby boy. The letter states that the young mother and her newborn child are doing well, resting and recovering from the delivery. Relief washes over the worried parents as they read the translated words of comfort. They pass the paper back and forth, celebrating the arrival of a new grandson into their lineage. The written message paints a portrait of a secure, happy family beginning their next chapter. The initial joy sparked by the Spanish letter transforms into an unsettling quiet in the subsequent weeks. The Colon family waits by their telephone expecting a call to arrange a time to meet the new baby. The heavy plastic receiver remains silent upon its cradle day after day. Relatives walk the familiar route down the concrete sidewalks to the neighboring apartment, hoping to catch a glimpse of the infant. Their knocks on the wooden door of the Sierra residence echo through an empty hallway, returning zero answers. All forms of communication from Evelyn cease without a single trace or explanation. The vibrant teenager who once filled their living room with laughter vanishes into an absolute void. The psychological manipulation of the handwritten letter takes hold of the family's reasoning. The comforting words inked on the page diffuse any immediate sense of panic or dread, because the message framed her absence as a temporary recovery period. Her loved ones assume she needs space to adjust to motherhood. The predator utilizes this calculated deception to construct a perfect buffer of time. The family rationalizes the silence, believing the young couple relocated to seek better employment opportunities. The calendar pages turn while the relatives stand stranded in a state of suspended animation, waiting for a reunion that the universe will deny them. The absolute lack of a formal missing persons report becomes the greatest tragedy of the initial timeline. Law enforcement officers in New Jersey remain ignorant of the fact that a 15-year-old girl and her newborn have vanished from their jurisdiction. The rigid protocols of the era dictate that police intervene upon clear evidence of foul play. Evelyn left her parents' home by her own choice to live with a romantic partner, nullifying any assumption of an abduction. The existence of the reassuring letter cements the illusion that she is a willing participant in her own life choices. Her parents respect the autonomy of their daughter, refusing to involve authorities in what appears to be a standard domestic transition. The local precinct continues its routine operations, dispatching cruisers past the empty apartment without a second glance. No detectives knock on doors to question neighbors, and no forensic units examine the floorboards for hidden evidence. The procedural gap creates a massive blind spot that swallows Evelyn's identity whole. Her family keeps her memory alive inside their home, preserving her childhood bedroom and waiting for her return. They stare out the frost-covered windows of their living room, scanning the crowded street for a familiar face. They remain blind to the horrific reality that their beloved daughter has met a brutal, permanent end miles across state lines. The biting wind of late December 1976 continues to howl through the Pennsylvania wilderness as state troopers process the harrowing scene beneath the steel bridge. Investigators transport the 3 weather-beaten suitcases to the county coroner facility. Inside the sterile confines of the examination room, medical examiners document the tragic reality contained within the luggage. The forensic experts confirm the victim is a young woman, noting the devastating presence of an unborn child who also met a grim fate. Detectives ink the rigid fingers of the unknown victim, pressing them onto standard physical cards to secure a permanent fingerprint record. Odontologists chart every distinct characteristic of her teeth, creating a comprehensive dental profile. Law enforcement officers express deep confidence that these concrete biological markers will generate a rapid identification. They assume a frantic family is already dialing the local precinct to report a missing pregnant teenager. Troopers dispatch the fingerprint, cards, and dental charts via postal mail to neighboring jurisdictions across the eastern seaboard. The investigators wait by their rotary telephones inside the cramped station, expecting a swift confirmation of her name. The days turn bitter and cold as the initial optimism begins to freeze. The silence from the outside agencies introduces a creeping sense of dread into the investigation. Detectives pin the physical descriptions to the corkboard of the precinct. They prepare to hunt down the predator responsible for discarding a human life like refuse. The county medical examiner assumes control of the biological evidence, initiating a rigorous examination of the victim inside the chilling morgue. Forensic specialists focus their efforts on establishing a precise age range and physical description to narrow down the search parameters. Anthropological measurements of the skeletal structure indicate the victim is merely a teenager, barely crossing the threshold of adolescence. The presence of the unborn child deepens the psychological weight of the room, silently communicating a tragic interruption of 2 generations. Odontologists conduct an exhaustive charting of her dental work, searching for distinct patterns in the enamel and previous fillings. They document specific anatomical traits, hoping a pediatric dentist might recognize the unique structure of the patient's jaw. The medical professionals compile a comprehensive physical profile, noting her dark hair and corresponding stature. Investigators forward this detailed biological packet to regional medical boards and dental associations. The detectives anticipate that a local physician will step forward to claim the patient files. The days stretch into weeks as the medical community returns blank stares and negative reports. The physical cataloging fails to trigger a single memory among the massive network of healthcare providers. The silence from the medical sector forces the law enforcement team to pivot away from biology and toward the inanimate objects left at the scene. The detectives realize the answers must lie within the luggage itself. Facing a lack of immediate biological matches, the Pennsylvania State Police shift their entire focus to the physical items recovered from the frost-bitten riverbank. Detectives place the 3 identical suitcases on the metal evidence tables under the harsh glare of fluorescent lights. They examine the vinyl surfaces, searching the worn fabric and rigid handles for identifying markers. The investigators locate specific manufacturing serial numbers stamped into the metallic hardware of the luggage. Law enforcement personnel initiate a massive logistical effort, contacting factory representatives and distributor networks across the United States. They spend weeks tracking the shipping manifests, hoping to trace the exact retail store that sold the specific items to the perpetrator. The investigative trail leads the troopers through a convoluted labyrinth of corporate records, warehouse logs, and dead-end retail receipts. Simultaneously, forensic teams analyze a distinct chenille bedspread used to conceal the remains inside the cases. Detectives carry swatches of the patterned fabric to textile experts, seeking the geographic origin of the unique threading. They visit local department stores across neighboring counties, questioning clerks and managers about recent purchases matching the bedspread description. The tedious legwork consumes hundreds of man-hours as the investigators knock on countless commercial doors. Despite the immense effort, the mass-produced nature of the luggage and the blanket provides an impenetrable shield for the perpetrator. The physical evidence refuses to yield a single geographic location or buyer name. Detectives reluctantly box up the luggage and the fabric, placing them deep within the secure evidence locker. The investigation slams into an immovable bureaucratic wall built upon the rigid jurisdictional protocols of the 1970s. The Pennsylvania authorities feed the collected fingerprints and physical descriptions into the National Law Enforcement Teletype Network. The massive machines churn out continuous requests to every major department, asking for cross-references against active missing persons reports. The systemic flaw of the era dictates that a person must be officially reported missing by family members to exist within the search parameters, because the Colenfant family in New Jersey never filed a formal report. Evelyn's biological markers float through the communication lines without a digital anchor. The jurisdictional divide creates a massive operational blind spot, preventing the New Jersey authorities from alerting their Pennsylvania counterparts. The law enforcement computers register 0 corresponding files, leaving the detectives blind to the tragic absence occurring in Jersey City. The strict boundaries of state lines and local precincts prevent the flow of organic community information. The state police follow procedure flawlessly, yet the bureaucratic structure actively shields the identity of the victim. The perpetrator leverages this exact gap in the system, relying on the forged letter to keep the authorities out of the equation. The absence of a missing persons file becomes the strongest weapon in the arsenal of the unknown criminal. The detectives stare at the silent teletype machines, realizing that the traditional avenues of law enforcement have failed them. The flawed system ensures the predator remains safe inside the bustling streets of New Jersey, forced to rely on public assistance outside the broken bureaucratic channels. The state police commissioned specialized forensic artists. These artists arrive at the precinct to reconstruct the face of the unknown teenager using the measurements gathered by the medical examiner. The draftsmen use pencils and charcoal to draw the youthful features of the young woman on thick white poster board. They focus heavily on her distinct facial structure, aiming to capture a likeness that a desperate parent might instantly recognize. Detectives print thousands of flyers featuring the hand-drawn sketch and distribute them to local newspapers and television stations. The image of the unidentified victim stares out from the black and white pages of morning gazettes across the state of Pennsylvania. News anchors broadcast the sketch during the evening reports, asking the public to search their memories for a missing pregnant teenager. Law enforcement officers monitor the telephone lines, hoping the widespread media coverage will generate a flood of actionable tips. Lacking a true identity to anchor the investigation, the investigators and the public bestow a tragic moniker upon the young woman. They formally name her Beth Doe, sealing her into the expanding files of the unknown and the unnamed. The name etched onto the forensic folders symbolizes a profound defeat for the investigators who swore to bring her justice. The media cycle eventually moves forward, leaving the face of Beth Doe behind in the archives of unsolved mysteries. The cold case settles into a deep freeze as the decade draws to a close. The calendar advances into the 1980s and 1990s, creating a devastating parallel reality that stretches across state lines. Inside the cold storage rooms of the Pennsylvania Police Department, the files of Beth Doe gather a thick layer of dust. Detectives rotate in and out of the homicide division, inheriting the heavy cardboard boxes filled with faded photographs and yellowing incident reports. The dedicated investigators pull the sketches out of the folders during slow night shifts, staring at the charcoal eyes of the victim. 3 hours away in New Jersey, the Colon family continues to navigate their daily routines under a crushing veil of false hope. The aging parents sit in their modest living room, preserving the forged Spanish letter inside a protective wooden drawer. They read the fading ink on the paper, anchoring their absolute faith to the lie that Evelyn is living a prosperous life. The psychological torture inflicted by the predator ensures that the family never connects their missing daughter to the news broadcasts circulating in neighboring jurisdictions. The family celebrates holidays and birthdays with an empty chair at the dining table, reserving a space for the young mother they believe is out there. The immense tragedy remains locked in a bizarre stasis, separated by a mere jurisdictional border and a single piece of stationery. The perpetrator walks free, shielded by a systemic oversight and his calculated manipulation of a deeply loving family. The relentless march of time buries the urgency of the case, leaving the mystery suspended in a tragic vacuum. The technological landscape of forensic science undergoes a seismic shift as the new millennium brings unprecedented investigative tools. In the year 2007, Pennsylvania authorities decide to utilize these modern advancements to pierce 3 decades of agonizing silence. Law enforcement officials secure a formal judicial order to exhume the remains of Beth Doe from her unmarked pauper grave. Heavy excavation machinery rumbles into the quiet cemetery, cutting through the thick grass and breaking the hardened earth. Forensic anthropologists stand by the open trench as workers hoist the weathered casket back to the surface under the gray sky. The investigative team transports the remains to a specialized modern laboratory equipped to handle highly degraded biological material. Scientists clad in sterile protective gear extract genetic samples from the porous bones of the unidentified victim. The laboratory technicians apply advanced chemical processes to isolate a complete viable genetic profile from the aged remnants. The investigators document every single step of the extraction, ensuring the strict chain of custody remains flawless for future court proceedings. This delicate scientific procedure bridges a massive gap of 31 years, offering the detectives a brand new key to the frozen investigation. The state troopers hold the digital genetic blueprint in their hands, feeling a renewed surge of profound determination. They believe the sophisticated science will finally tear away the mask of the predator and restore the stolen name of the forgotten teenager. The renewed optimism surrounding the exhumation quickly collides with the rigid boundaries of traditional law enforcement networks. Investigators upload the pristine genetic profile of Beth Doe into the National Federal Database, initiating an automated search across the country. The digital system scans millions of secure entries, comparing the molecular markers against a vast registry of known convicted individuals. The strict parameters of the federal system require that a direct relative or the perpetrator must already exist within the criminal database to trigger a match. Because Evelyn's law-abiding family members possess no criminal records, their genetic information remains absent from the government servers. The computer monitors flash a negative result indicating 0 matches across the entire nationwide network. The advanced science provides a perfect biological key, but the detectives lack the appropriate digital lock to insert it into. The devastating failure of the database plunges the state troopers back into the agonizing darkness of the cold case files. The investigators place the genetic profile onto secure digital servers, where it sits dormant for another long stretch of years. The true identity of Beth Doe remains trapped within the microscopic strands of her own biology, waiting for another major technological leap. The Colon family continues to age in New Jersey, unaware that the secret to their daughter's fate rests inside a Pennsylvania laboratory. The massive gap between the forensic reality and the grieving family endures, setting the stage for a final groundbreaking maneuver. The year 2020 brings a revolution to the silent corridors of the Pennsylvania State Police. Investigators pivot away from rigid federal databases and turn toward the sprawling digital landscape of commercial genetic genealogy. Forensic experts take the pristine biological profile of Beth Doe and upload the data into a public ancestry network known as GDMatch. This open-source platform contains millions of voluntary genetic submissions from ordinary citizens seeking to map their heritage. Specialized genealogists sit in front of glowing computer monitors, navigating a complex web of shared chromosomal data. The advanced algorithm processes the genetic markers, bypassing the need for a pre-existing law enforcement criminal record. The digital search transcends the bureaucratic walls that hindered previous generations of frustrated detectives. The system flags a direct familial connection residing within the massive digital family tree. The molecular breadcrumbs lead the investigative team straight to a man named Louis Colon Jr. Detectives confirm through rigorous genealogical tracing that this individual is the biological nephew of the unidentified victim. The monumental discovery shatters a 44-year silence, providing the first concrete tether to a real human family. Investigators cross-reference the family lineage, zeroing in on a teenage girl who vanished from Jersey City decades prior. Law enforcement officers finally possess the true name of the young woman discarded by the river. They pick up the telephone, preparing to make a call that will bridge the agonizing geographic gap between Pennsylvania and New Jersey. The telephone rings inside the Colon household, shattering the protective illusion they maintained for over 4 decades. Pennsylvania state troopers inform the surviving family members that the mysterious Beth Doe is actually their beloved Evelyn Colon. The devastating news forces the aging relatives to reconcile their long-held hope with a brutal, undeniable reality. The investigators travel to New Jersey to gather physical context, reconstructing the timeline of the year 1976. Detectives focus their attention on the exact period. Evelyn shared a modest apartment with her young partner. The geographic and temporal puzzle pieces snap into place with terrifying precision. Law enforcement links the acquisition of the 3 weather-beaten suitcases directly to the time Evelyn lived with Louis Sierra. The horrific realization washes over the investigative team as they review the details of the Spanish letter. Sierra utilized that forged piece of stationery to construct a flawless alibi and paralyze the family from seeking police intervention. The predator hid his ultimate crime behind the guise of a normal developing domestic life. He exploited the immense trust of a loving Puerto Rican family, ensuring they would wait patiently for a daughter who could never return. The deliberate psychological manipulation allowed him to pack his belongings and walk away without generating a single missing persons report. The calculated deception provided him an impenetrable shield of time and distance. The authorities redirect their entire operational focus toward locating the man who orchestrated this decades-long masquerade. In March of 2021, the geographic hunt leads law enforcement to a quiet residential block in Ozone Park, New York. Pennsylvania State Police units surround a modest property, closing a massive loop that remained open for nearly half a century. Investigators step onto the concrete porch and place 63-year-old Luis Sierra in custody. The man who lived an ordinary, uninterrupted life for decades faces the ghosts of his hidden past. Sierra is transported across state lines to face a severe indictment in the state of Pennsylvania. The wheels of the justice system begin to turn, promising a swift resolution for the grieving Colon family. However, the complex nature of the historic cold case introduces a profound legal hurdle regarding proper jurisdiction. Defense attorneys argue that the fatal events likely occurred inside the Jersey City apartment before the perpetrator crossed the state border. The rigid rules of criminal prosecution dictate that a trial must occur in the exact geographic location where the primary offense took place. In early 2025, a Pennsylvania judge officially dismisses the local charges due to this specific jurisdictional conflict. This agonizing legal loophole forces the entire prosecutorial burden onto the shoulders of the New Jersey legal system. The venue shifts back to the very streets where the tragic deception originated. The Corlin family must endure another grueling chapter of legal maneuvering to secure a final verdict. The shifting battleground highlights the infuriating systemic barriers that families face when seeking accountability across state lines. Despite the ongoing complexities of the legal arena, a profound moral victory materializes in the physical world. Surviving members of the Corlin family gather at the quiet cemetery in Pennsylvania where the unknown victim rested for decades. The relatives stand together on the cold grass, reclaiming the sacred space that the bureaucratic system previously denied them. Cemetery workers physically remove the generic granite marker bearing the tragic moniker of Beth Doe from the earth. A brand new, polished headstone is carefully lowered into its rightful place. The pristine surface bears the true, formally restored name of Evelyn Corlin. Deep engravings in the stone acknowledge the young teenager and her unborn child, granting them the eternal dignity stripped away in 1976. The solemn ceremony brings an agonizing but necessary closure to a family that endured 44 years of calculated deception. Evelyn transitions from a forgotten sketch pinned to a precinct corkboard into a recognized human being surrounded by her true heritage. The intricate illusion designed by an arrogant predator is entirely shattered, leaving behind a permanent legacy of undeniable truth. While advanced science closes the final chapter in the frost-covered valleys of Pennsylvania, the dark waters of another region hold an entirely different secret. Hundreds of miles away in the deep south, a heartbreaking sight from an interstate bridge prepares to ignite a mystery that will shock a new community to its core. On the freezing morning of December 5, 1982, an urgent call echoes through the dispatch center of Jackson County, Mississippi. A commercial truck driver passing over the towering Interstate 10 bridge reports a heartbreaking sight below. He believes he sees the lifeless body of an adult woman floating in the dark, churning waters of the Escatawpa River. First responders rush over the damp asphalt, scanning the treacherous currents from the bridge railing, but the woman is nowhere to be found. Instead, sheriff deputies fighting their way through the dense, tangled brush downriver make a completely different soul-crushing discovery. Caught in the thick coastal weeds lies a female toddler, no older than 2 years, dressed in a delicate pink and white checkered dress. Medical examiners soon determine the child survived a deliberate attempt to smother her, only to tragically drown after plunging into the freezing water below. The devastating find sends a shockwave through the local community, igniting an interstate mystery that will endure for decades. Before the dark waters of the Escapa River claimed a nameless child, a vibrant little girl named Elisha Ann Heinrich lived a quiet, unassuming life in the American Midwest. She spent her earliest days in Joplin, Missouri, a hardworking town defined by tight-knit communities and enduring family bonds. Born to her young mother, Gwendolyn Clemens, Elisha brought profound joy to an extended network of relatives who deeply cherished the smiling 18-month-old toddler. Gwendolyn navigated the complex challenges of single motherhood with fierce dedication, relying heavily on the unwavering support of her parents and siblings. The sprawling Clemens family gathered frequently, filling their homes with the comforting sounds of shared meals and children playing in the yard. Photographs from that era capture a radiant, blonde-haired little girl, her bright eyes reflecting the warmth and security provided by her protective relatives. The family home offered a sanctuary of routine and affection, shielding Elisha from the unpredictable nature of the outside world. Gwendolyn harbored grand ambitions for her daughter, dreaming of opportunities far beyond the borders of their Missouri hometown. She wanted to build a stable, prosperous foundation, breaking away from the financial struggles that often constrained young mothers in the early 1980s. Neighbors remembered them as a quiet but affectionate pair, frequently seen walking together beneath the large shade trees lining their Joplin neighborhood. Despite the deep roots planted in Missouri, an underlying restlessness began to stir within Gwendolyn as the year 1982 progressed. She sought a dramatic change of scenery, yearning for the promise of coastal sunshine and economic opportunity. This desire for a fresh start materialized into a concrete plan during the autumn months of 1982. Gwendolyn firmly decided to relocate to the state of Florida, visualizing a completely new chapter for herself and little Elisha. She did not plan to make this ambitious cross-country journey alone. A new romantic partner had entered her life, presenting himself as a supportive companion ready to help facilitate this major transition. The boyfriend possessed a vehicle and the means to travel, offering the young mother a practical way to execute her dreams of a southern relocation. The Clemens family watched these developments with a mixture of natural apprehension and genuine hope for Gwendolyn's future happiness. They engaged in numerous conversations about the logistics of the trip, offering advice and wishing the young couple safe travels on the long highway ahead. Gwendolyn meticulously packed their modest belongings, folding tiny dresses and gathering Elisha's favorite toys for the demanding interstate drive. The atmosphere in the household crackled with the nervous energy that accompanies any major life change. Relatives hugged the 18-month-old toddler one last time, completely unaware this would be their final embrace. The family believed they were sending Gwendolyn and Elisha toward a bright, promising horizon filled with new opportunities and lasting stability. The young mother loaded her daughter into the vehicle, closing the door on her Missouri life and turning the ignition toward a destination they would never actually reach. The journey toward Florida commenced with high spirits and regular communication, keeping the Missouri relatives tethered to the young family on the road. As the calendar advanced toward Thanksgiving of 1982, the vehicle carved its way down the sprawling American highway system. Gwendolyn maintained contact with her loved ones back home, providing brief but reassuring updates from various truck stops and roadside diners. The family eagerly awaited these dispatches, plotting the progress of the young mother and the little girl on an imaginary map. The final communication arrived right around the Thanksgiving holiday, carrying no hint of distress or impending danger. Gwendolyn reached out to her relatives, casually mentioning they were currently traveling through the state of Mississippi. She spoke of the changing landscape and the humid southern air, painting a picture of an uneventful road trip nearing its destination. The tone of the conversation remained entirely normal, devoid of any strange inflections or whispered warnings. Nobody on the receiving end of that call could have predicted the sudden, absolute silence that would immediately follow. After that brief geographic update, both Gwendolyn and 18-month-old Elisha vanished without a single trace. Days turned into weeks without another phone call, leaving the Clemens family waiting anxiously by their landline telephone. The festive holiday season morphed into an agonizing period of uncertainty, as the once reliable stream of communication dried up completely. The deafening silence broke only when the boyfriend reappeared in Missouri, completely alone and lacking any coherent explanation for his sudden return. He drove the same vehicle back into Joplin, but the passenger seats remained chillingly empty. When confronted by a frantic and demanding Clemens family, the man delivered a carefully constructed narrative designed to absolve himself of any responsibility. He claimed that a severe relationship-ending argument had erupted between him and Gwendolyn somewhere along the southern route. According to his deeply suspicious account, the young mother angrily demanded he leave her and the toddler behind to forge their own path. He portrayed himself as the aggrieved party, insisting he merely followed her strict instructions to abandon them and return to the Midwest. The family found themselves entirely blind to the horrifying reality unfolding hundreds of miles away in the Mississippi Delta. Relying solely on this fabricated narrative, they remained completely unaware of any sinister foul play or physical harm. Law enforcement databases of the 1980s lacked the sophisticated, interconnected networks required to link a missing persons report in Missouri with an unidentified body in the Deep South. The physical distance between the families and the crime scene created an impenetrable wall of geographic isolation. The relatives simply assumed Gwendolyn had successfully started her new life, choosing pride and independence over maintaining contact after a messy breakup. They waited patiently for a letter or a phone call that would never come, wholly ignorant of the tragedy resting in the Escatawpa River. Down in Jackson County, Mississippi, law enforcement agencies mobilized massive resources along the banks of the Escatawpa River. The physical geography of the search grid presented a nightmare for the dive teams. Dark, murky currents flowed rapidly beneath the massive concrete pylons of the Interstate 10 bridge, hiding deep pockets of tangled underwater debris. Detectives operated under the grim assumption that the adult woman spotted by the commercial truck driver rested somewhere in that freezing water. Search and rescue boats launched from muddy ramps, equipped with heavy metal drag lines to scrape the uneven riverbed. Marine Patrol units executed precise grid patterns, scanning the surface for any sign of a submerged vehicle or another victim. Divers plunged into the zero-visibility depths, navigating strictly by touch as they felt their way around submerged logs and discarded metal. They searched relentlessly for a mother who might have plunged into the current alongside the little girl. Helicopter units circled above the tree line, utilizing the winter sunlight to peer into the shallow marshlands flanking the main channel. Despite executing one of the most thorough marine searches in county history, the river yielded absolutely nothing. No submerged sedan sat wedged in the mud, and no adult female victim floated to the surface. The complete absence of a second victim or a vehicle baffled the incident commanders standing on the shoreline. Whoever orchestrated this tragedy managed to leave behind the child while vanishing entirely from the immediate geographic perimeter. Investigators found themselves holding only a tragic mystery, anchored solely by the tiny victim recovered from the brush. Inside the county morgue, the coroner faced the heartbreaking task of documenting the unidentified child. Lacking a name, a missing persons report, or any identifying documents, deputies affectionately christened the child Delta Dawn. She wore a distinctive pink and white checkered dress, a garment investigators hoped would trigger someone's memory. Police distributed detailed physical descriptions and composite sketches to regional newspapers and television stations. The media blitz generated a massive influx of telephone calls, forcing detectives to man the dispatch center around the clock. Amidst the noise, one specific tip emerged with striking credibility and chilling implications. Several independent motorists reported seeing a highly distressed woman walking along the dark shoulder of Interstate 10 the night before the discovery. These witnesses placed the woman carrying a toddler directly on the highway, walking westbound near the Mississippi and Alabama state line. The geographic coordinates of the sighting aligned perfectly with the bridge spanning the Escatawpa River. According to the motorists, the woman appeared agitated, refusing offers of assistance and waving vehicles away from her path. Detectives viewed this as a critical breakthrough, assuming this woman was the mother of Delta Dawn. They theorized a desperate scenario where a stranded traveler made a fatal decision in the dead of night. Investigators aggressively pursued the interstate sighting, deploying patrol units to retrace the exact westbound route described by the motorists. Deputies walked miles of dangerous highway shoulder, searching the tall grass for discarded clothing, a stalled vehicle, or a makeshift campsite. They interviewed toll booth operators, gas station attendants, and late-night diners located at the nearest exits. Detectives pulled the physical logs from local towing companies, checking to see if any abandoned vehicles required removal that evening. They cross-referenced the physical description of the agitated woman with local domestic disturbance calls from the surrounding towns. Law enforcement officers scoured the nearby woods and underpasses, shining heavy flashlights into culverts and drainage pipes. Despite this exhaustive physical mapping of the corridor, the mysterious woman walking on the highway evaporated into thin air. The lead generated intense momentum but ultimately crashed into a solid brick wall. Investigators found no broken-down car, no discarded luggage, and no trace of an adult female in the vicinity. The tip proved completely useless in identifying the little girl in the pink and white dress. The failure of this lead forced detectives back to square one, lacking any tangible evidence to explain the tragedy on the bridge. The trail went ice-cold right there on the Mississippi asphalt, leaving the task force with zero actionable suspects. The investigation immediately collided with the severe technological and jurisdictional limitations of the 1980s. During this era, law enforcement agencies operated within strict geographic silos, rarely sharing data across state lines. The national database existed, but it relied on fragmented, manually entered teletype reports. When a missing persons report lacked clear evidence of a crime, local departments often delayed entering the names into the federal system. Meanwhile, up in Missouri, the Clemens family continued to believe Gwendolyn had simply cut ties to start anew in Florida, because the boyfriend provided a plausible narrative of a voluntary separation. Missouri authorities had no immediate reason to launch a major investigation. No official alert flashed across the wire to connect an absent mother in the Midwest with a nameless toddler in the Deep South. Jackson County detectives sent bulletins to neighboring states, but the vast distance to Missouri kept the cases isolated from one another. The bureaucratic divide created a perfect shield for the perpetrator, allowing the tragedy to remain completely undetected by the victim's family. The rigid protocols of missing persons investigations prevented anyone from looking beyond their own county borders. The file on Delta Dawn sat untouched in a steel cabinet, gathering dust alongside other unsolved mysteries while detectives exhausted all traditional avenues. Jackson County citizens held a somber funeral for the little girl, purchasing a headstone that bore her tragic nickname. The silent vigil over the grave lasted until the year 2009, when advancements in forensic science offered a glimmer of hope. Cold case investigators in Mississippi reopened the heavy cardboard boxes containing the original 1982 reports. They recognized that modern extraction techniques provided a powerful new tool unavailable to the original detectives. Armed with a court order, authorities authorized the legal exhumation of the child's remains from the local cemetery. Forensic anthropologists carefully excavated the burial site, working meticulously to preserve the delicate physical evidence. The remains traveled securely to a specialized forensic laboratory equipped to handle decades-old biological material. Scientists targeted the standard testing protocols, hoping to build a complete genetic profile of the child. Technicians dissolved bone fragments in chemical solutions, attempting to isolate the core building blocks of her cells. They planned to upload the resulting profile into the national database to search for potential family members. Law enforcement officers stood by, anticipating a rapid technological breakthrough that would finally give the child her real name. The exhumation represented a massive investment of time and resources, fueled by the persistent dedication of the cold case unit. They firmly believed science would pierce the veil of anonymity that had protected the perpetrator for nearly 30 years. The high hopes resting on the exhumation quickly shattered against the harsh reality of biological degradation. The harsh, humid environment of the Mississippi Delta had wreaked absolute havoc on the buried remains. Decades of groundwater saturation and acidic soil conditions severely compromised the cellular integrity of the samples. The laboratory technicians struggled to pull a complete viable genetic sequence from the fragmented biological material. The standard forensic profiling methods of 2009 simply lacked the sensitivity required to read such heavily damaged information. The extracted profile contained far too many missing markers to generate a functional search algorithm in the national database. The system returned 0 matches, leaving the cold case detectives staring at another frustrating dead end. The technological ceiling of the era prevented the investigators from bridging the gap between the genetic fragments and a living relative. The child was carefully reinterred in her grave, the mystery of her identity locked away once again beneath the Mississippi soil. The case files returned to the shelf, leaving a new generation of detectives haunted by the enduring image of the little girl. Despite the tireless efforts of multiple agencies, the identity of the child and the fate of her mother remained entirely obscured. The perpetrator continued to live freely, shielded by the strict limitations of contemporary forensic science and the vast American highway system. The year 2020 brought an unprecedented technological revolution to the Mississippi Cold Case Unit. Detectives refused to let the nameless toddler fade into permanent obscurity. They packaged the degraded biological samples recovered during the 2009 exhumation. A specialized courier transported the vital evidence across state lines. The destination was a sterile, highly secure laboratory located in the Woodlands, Texas. This facility housed the brilliant scientists at Othram Incorporated. The forensic genealogy team possessed advanced tools unavailable to previous generations of law enforcement. They bypassed the standard profiling methods that failed a decade earlier. Scientists deployed a cutting-edge technique known as forensic-grade genome sequencing. This powerful technology required only microscopic, fractured cellular fragments to reconstruct a comprehensive genetic blueprint. The machines hummed in the Texas laboratory, reading millions of microscopic data points. The shattered genetic code of the little girl began to repair itself on the computer monitors. The technological ceiling shattered into pieces. For the first time in 38 years, investigators held a highly detailed map of the victim's ancestry. Armed with this comprehensive genetic profile, genealogists launched a massive digital investigation. They uploaded the sequencing data into secure law enforcement-approved ancestry databases. The complex algorithms searched millions of public records for a familial match. A distinct pattern of shared genetic markers emerged on the digital family tree. The branches extended northward, pointing directly toward the American Midwest. The digital trail crossed several state lines before stopping in Joplin, Missouri. Genealogists traced the lineage down to a specific household. They identified the Spaulding-Clemens family. Detectives reviewing the genealogical report uncovered a chilling detail buried in the local archives. The Clemens family possessed a young daughter who vanished alongside her toddler in late 1982. Law enforcement officers placed an urgent phone call to the Missouri relatives. The ensuing conversation unraveled a decades-old web of deception. The family explained their long-held belief that the young mother started a new life in Florida. Investigators requested a fresh genetic sample from a direct family member. The subsequent laboratory comparison provided absolute scientific certainty. The definitive scientific match sent shockwaves through the investigative command center. The nameless child recovered from the Escatawpa River regained her true identity. Delta Dawn was established as 18-month-old Elisha Ann Heinrich. This monumental breakthrough dismantled the intricate narrative constructed nearly 4 decades prior. The boyfriend's story of an angry separation on the highway collapsed into a pile of transparent lies. His claims of a voluntary abandonment served merely as a calculated smokescreen. He utilized the vast geographic distance and the fragmented missing persons databases to conceal a permanent, fatal tragedy. The realization struck the Missouri relatives with devastating force. The man who sat in their living room and claimed innocence left a toddler in a freezing Mississippi River. He drove the young mother's vehicle back to Joplin while harboring an unspeakable secret. The calculated deception allowed him to walk away unchallenged by local authorities. The lack of an integrated national database gave him a permanent shield. The scientific revelation transformed a cold missing persons inquiry into an active, multi-state criminal investigation. The predator hiding in plain sight lost his anonymity forever. In December 2020, law enforcement officials convened a solemn press conference in Jackson County, Mississippi. They stood before a bank of television cameras to announce the official identification of the toddler. The historic declaration brought a bitter, agonizing sense of peace to the surviving members of the Clemens family. The relatives understood why the promised phone calls from Florida never arrived. They absorbed the crushing reality that the little girl with the bright smile met a grim, permanent end on a dark highway bridge. The decades of waiting and wondering dissolved into profound grief. The family traveled from Missouri to Mississippi to stand upon the grounds where the tragedy unfolded. They met the dedicated local citizens and former detectives who safeguarded the child's memory for 38 years. The community that adopted the unknown victim embraced her true relatives. Detectives formally updated the vast federal databases, closing the nameless file that haunted the department for generations. The collective efforts of dedicated investigators and brilliant scientists restored a stolen identity. Justice began with speaking her true name aloud. The identification of the little girl cast a dark, permanent shadow over the fate of her young mother. Gwendolyn Clemens remains missing to this very day. Law enforcement officials reclassified the young woman as a victim of profound foul play. Detectives operate under the firm conviction that she met the exact same tragic fate as her young daughter. The physical search for her remains continues across the sprawling rural landscapes separating Missouri and the Gulf Coast. The investigative focus pivoted back to the boyfriend who delivered the fabricated alibi in 1982. Authorities prepared to dismantle his life and hold him accountable for the devastating destruction of a young family. However, the pursuit of a courtroom conviction collided with the passage of time. The primary suspect passed away years before the genetic breakthrough occurred. His death robbed the grieving family of a highly anticipated trial and a definitive criminal verdict. He escaped a physical prison cell, but the relentless application of forensic science destroyed his carefully crafted deception. History will forever remember him not as an aggrieved partner, but as the architect of a terrible tragedy. Deep within a quiet Mississippi cemetery, a dedicated group of locals gathered for one final act of restoration. The granite headstone bearing the nickname Delta Dawn received a beautiful permanent alteration. Skilled stonemasons carved the name Elisha Ann Heinrich into the heavy rock. The 18-month-old toddler no longer rests as a nameless stranger in an adopted state. Her true identity stands as a permanent testament to the enduring power of modern investigative science. The tireless dedication of cold case detectives ensured that a forgotten child reclaimed her rightful place in history. While the Mississippi Delta yielded its longest-held secret, other quiet corners of the American landscape continued to harbor their own nameless mysteries. Far to the north, the rural farmlands of the Midwest concealed another chilling puzzle waiting for discovery. Just 1 year prior to the tragedy on the Escatawpa River Bridge, a different community stumbled upon a haunting scene. A quiet agricultural road in Ohio held a young woman wearing a distinct, handmade buckskin garment. The search for a name was about to begin all over again. The morning air on April 24, 1981, carries a distinct chill through the rural expanse of Troy, Ohio. Along the desolate shoulder of Greenlee Road, a patch of dense weeds conceals a grim reality. A young woman lies motionless in the ditch, having sustained severe blunt impacts to her head and fatal compression to her neck. She carries no identification, no purse, and no name. The only defining clue left behind is a handmade, fringed buckskin poncho draped over her shoulders. This singular garment becomes the haunting centerpiece of a mystery that will consume detectives for 37 years. Nestled within the quiet residential neighborhoods of Arkansas, the King household stands as an anchor of stability. The home radiates a warm, lived-in atmosphere defined by the familiar hum of the refrigerator and the worn fabric of the living room sofa. The front porch overlooks a predictable, quiet street where neighbors exchange morning greetings and watch the seasons change. Here, Marcia King spends her formative years. She is 21 years old, possessing a bright smile and a restless spirit that clashes with the static nature of her hometown. The late 1970s usher in a cultural wave of exploration, drawing many young people away from traditional expectations. Marcia feels the pull of the open highway. She watches the taillights of passing cars fade into the horizon and dreams of experiencing the vast landscape beyond the state lines. The structured routines of small-town life feel stifling to her adventurous mindset. She craves movement, new faces, and the unpredictable rhythm of a transient lifestyle. Despite her desire to wander, she maintains deep, unbreakable roots, tying her to her mother. The physical distance between them will soon grow, but the emotional connection remains the defining force in both of their lives. The transition from the late 1970s into the early 1980s brings a distinct sense of freedom to the American highways. Gas stations hum with the glow of fluorescent lights, and long stretches of interstate asphalt serve as the veins connecting isolated towns. Marcy embraces this nomadic culture. She relies on the kindness of strangers, holding out her thumb on the edge of busy access roads. The rumble of diesel engines and the rush of passing wind become her daily soundtrack. Hitchhiking during this era represents a recognized, albeit risky, mode of transportation for restless youth. She travels across various states, absorbing the changing scenery from the passenger seats of semi-trucks and station wagons. Her journey lacks a rigid itinerary. She moves on instinct, finding temporary work or shelter before feeling the urge to pack her meager belongings and move again. Through all these geographical shifts, the payphone serves as her lifeline. She collects heavy coins and memorizes the dialing codes, ensuring she can reach across the country to the quiet house in Arkansas. The clatter of quarters dropping into the metal slot signals another check-in. The metal receiver connects her transient world to her permanent home. Her mother anchors her life around the heavy rotary telephone sitting on the kitchen counter. The device represents the only bridge between her quiet existence and her daughter's sprawling journey. Marcia calls home with a reassuring consistency. She dictates her current coordinates, describes the people she meets, and promises to stay safe. Her mother listens to the background noise of distant traffic or chatter echoing through the receiver. These conversations provide a necessary comfort, establishing an unspoken pact between the two women. No matter how far the highway takes her, Marcia will always find a phone booth. Her mother trusts this routine. She memorizes the timing of the calls, learning to anticipate the shrill ring that breaks the silence of her kitchen. The Arkansas home remains a static sanctuary, a fixed point on the map where the porch light always burns. Marcia possesses the absolute certainty that she can return whenever the road loses its appeal. The fringed buckskin poncho she wears offers physical warmth, but the voice on the other end of the telephone provides her true sense of security. This bond defies the miles of concrete separating them. The dawn of 1981 brings a renewed chill to the air as Marcia prepares for another departure. She stands in the familiar warmth of her mother's home in Arkansas. Gathering her sparse travel gear, the worn fabric of her bags holds the necessities of a life lived on the move. She outlines her projected route, pointing her ambitions north toward the winding roads of Kentucky and the industrial corridors of Ohio. Her mother watches the preparations with the practiced composure of a woman accustomed to goodbyes. The heavy wooden front door closes, clicking shut and echoing through the quiet hallway. Outside, the morning frost coats the dormant grass, crunching beneath Margie Seth's boots as she walks toward the street. The quiet Arkansas neighborhood watches her leave, unaware that this specific departure carries an underlying finality. She navigates the local roads, merging onto the larger interstates that carve through the American Midwest. The physical miles accumulate between the traveler and her sanctuary. At the beginning of this journey, the routine holds firm. The expectation of a phone call remains intact. Days stretch into weeks as the calendar pages turn, but the heavy rotary phone in the Arkansas kitchen sits in silence. The predictable rhythm of the check-ins breaks without warning. No collect calls interrupt the evening quiet, and no postcards arrive in the metal mailbox at the end of the driveway. The silence fills the rooms of the house, heavy and suffocating. Her mother begins a vigilant watch over the telephone, staying within earshot of the device at all times. The physical space around the kitchen counter becomes a site of heavy anticipation. She refuses to leave the house for extended periods, fearing she might miss the ring. She waits for the mechanical sound that will announce her daughter's location. The days bleed into one another, marked only by the shifting shadows across the linoleum floor. The absence of communication contradicts everything known about Marcy's established habits. The young woman who always found a payphone, regardless of her circumstances, has vanished from the grid. The silence offers no clues, leaving a void filled with growing dread. The connection is severed. The world outside the Arkansas home continues its pace, but time stalls for the waiting mother. The spring thaw approaches, softening the frost outside the windows, yet a cold realization settles inside the walls. She contacts local authorities, attempting to articulate the danger of the silence, but the systemic response offers little comfort. Law enforcement protocols of the era dictate that adults possess the right to sever contact and disappear. The shifting jurisdictions and lack of centralized databases create a bureaucratic maze. The local police record the details, noting the buckskin poncho and the intended route, but action stalls. The rigid rules prevent officers from launching an immediate, wide-scale search for a young woman known for her nomadic habits. The mother remains stranded in a state of suspended animation, unable to grieve and unable to find peace. The static hum of the refrigerator provides the only noise in the oppressive quiet of the kitchen. She stares at the silent telephone, understanding that her daughter's journey has encountered an unknown disruption. The miles stretching between Arkansas and Ohio conceal a truth she cannot yet see. The free-spirited traveler in the fringed jacket has met a grim fate. Her mother prepares for a wait that will span decades. On the morning of April 24, 1981, Miami County patrol cruisers navigate the winding asphalt of Greenlee Road. The rural route stretches across the flat agricultural expanse of western Ohio, bordered by dense tree lines and shallow drainage ditches. Deputies arrive at a designated location near the intersection, stepping out into the cold spring air. They descend into the tall, damp weeds lining the shoulder of the road. The officers document a chilling scene, establishing a perimeter around the young woman resting in the brush. Investigators note the distinct absence of personal effects. No handbag, no travel tickets, and no identification cards sit within the vicinity. The physical evidence points toward a sudden, forceful end, leaving her stripped of her identity. The striking buckskin poncho draped over her shoulders provides the single focal point for the early investigation. Crime scene technicians photograph the handmade fringes and the reddish-brown leather, noting its unique craftsmanship. They secure the garment into evidence bags, hoping the distinct clothing item will trigger a memory from a passing motorist. Local news outlets broadcast images of the jacket across regional television stations. Detectives wait by their desk phones at the precinct, anticipating a flood of public tips. The calls remain sparse, offering vague sightings that fail to materialize into actionable leads. The county coroner conducts a thorough examination in the sterile environment of the local morgue. Medical examiners document blunt trauma to the skull and deep tissue damage around the throat. These findings confirm the victim sustained a deliberate, fatal attack before being discarded along the rural highway. Technicians ink her fingers, pressing the prints onto standard cardstock. Dental experts chart her teeth, noting specific fillings and the overall alignment of her jaw. Law enforcement officers input these physical markers into the national teletype system, sending physical descriptions to neighboring states. The rhythmic clatter of the teletype machines echoes through police stations across the Midwest. In theory, this network connects distant jurisdictions, allowing missing person reports to match with unidentified remains. However, the technological limitations of the era create a fragmented, inefficient system. Officers in separate counties rely on manual searches through towering filing cabinets filled with paper records. Without a name to anchor the search, the physical description of the young woman gets lost in a sea of identical teletype printouts. The Troy investigators realize their victim exists outside the localized grid of known residents. They need a moniker to file the mounting paperwork and organize the expanding case file. Drawing inspiration from her defining garment, they label her file with a name that will echo through the department for decades. She officially becomes known to the world as Buckskin Girl. Throughout the 1980s, the geographical position of Ohio places it at the center of several overlapping interstate highways. These sprawling corridors provide anonymity for transient predators operating across state lines. Miami County detectives turn their focus toward active regional serial offenders known to target hitchhikers. They pull suspect files from state penitentiaries and coordinate with federal task forces. Investigators conduct face-to-face interviews with incarcerated offenders, presenting photographs of the buckskin poncho. They interrogate men with established histories of roadside attacks, pressing for confessions or slips of information. Each suspect interview demands hours of meticulous preparation and cross-referencing of travel logs. Despite the intense scrutiny, the alibis hold firm against the timeline of April 1981. Prison visitor logs, employment records, and traffic citations place the primary suspects in different jurisdictions during the critical window. The detectives encounter a wall of factual dead ends. False tips from the public further drain departmental resources. Well-meaning citizens report seeing a girl in a similar jacket at a truck stop, prompting officers to drive hundreds of miles to verify a mistaken identity. The rigid protocols of interstate investigations require officers to chase every lead, no matter how tenuous. Days of travel result in empty folders and growing frustration within the squad room. The fundamental flaw in the missing persons infrastructure of the 1980s dictates the trajectory of the investigation. Jurisdictional boundaries act as impenetrable walls, isolating crucial information within local sheriff departments. When a person vanishes in one state, the report rarely reaches the desk of a coroner 3 states away. No centralized digitized national database exists to cross-reference fingerprints against missing person files automatically. An investigator in Ohio must know exactly which town in America to call in order to find the matching report. The sheer vastness of the country turns this requirement into a statistical impossibility. Detectives resort to mailing physical composite sketches to police departments across the nation. Mailrooms process thousands of these flyers, often pinning them to crowded bulletin boards where they fade under fluorescent lights. The paperwork error lies not in malice, but in the overwhelming volume of missing youths during this era. The rigid system relies on active human memory rather than computational matching. If a patrol officer in another state fails to memorize a specific bulletin, the connection vanishes. This bureaucratic maze ensures that a transient victim without localized ties remains nameless. The Miami County investigators battle an infrastructure designed to fail the very people it aims to protect. Their dedication cannot overcome the archaic nature of paper-based law enforcement. While detectives in Ohio navigate towering stacks of administrative files, a different kind of waiting occurs in Arkansas. Marcia King's mother remains anchored to the exact geographic coordinates of her quiet neighborhood home. The physical space inside the house transforms into a shrine of suspended time. She refuses to disconnect the heavy rotary telephone sitting on the kitchen counter. Telecommunication companies transition to new networks and area code shift, yet she pays the premium to keep her specific digit sequence unchanged. She understands that a transient traveler relies on memorized phone numbers when reaching a payphone. If her daughter finds a way to a booth, the number must connect. Neighbors move away and the surrounding community evolves, but the mother refuses to list the house for sale. Relocating would mean severing the final physical tether to her vanished child. She checks the metal mailbox at the end of the driveway every afternoon, sorting through utility bills and advertisements. She searches for handwriting on the back of a postcard from a distant truck stop. The psychological weight of this open-ended mystery exacts a heavy toll on her daily existence. Investigators search the country for a nameless victim, unaware that a mother waits by a phone just a few states away. The silent kitchen becomes the true epicenter of the tragedy. As the calendar shifts from the 1980s into the late 1990s, the Miami County Sheriff's Office refuses to close the file. A new generation of detectives inherits the banker boxes filled with yellowing paper. They turn to emerging scientific disciplines to break the decades-long stagnation. Investigators package the buckskin poncho and send it to specialized laboratories for palynology. Forensic botanists extract microscopic pollen grains trapped deep within the leather fringes. The analysis reveals specific plant spores native to the northeastern United States and the Midwest. This environmental data confirms the victim spent significant time traveling through those distinct geographic regions before her death. Detectives push the boundaries of science further, authorizing stable isotope testing on strands of her hair. Scientists measure the chemical signatures of oxygen and carbon absorbed from local drinking water into the hair shaft. The resulting timeline of chemical markers maps her geographical movements over the final months of her life. The data suggests she moved from the southern states up through the Ohio River Valley. These highly specialized forensic tests paint a vivid map of a nomadic journey. However, the advanced science only answers questions about where she traveled, not who she was. The name of the buckskin girl remains hidden behind the cold, hard data. The physical remains of the unidentified woman rest in Riverside Cemetery, located just a few miles from the original crime scene. The groundskeepers maintain a simple headstone inscribed with the words Jane Doe. Local residents and retired investigators regularly visit the plot, leaving flowers on the manicured grass. The community adopts the nameless traveler, ensuring her memory does not fade into obscurity. Back in the precinct, the original case file swells to encompass thousands of pages of eliminated leads. The investigators catalog every negative fingerprint match and every discarded suspect profile. The sheer volume of the investigation stands as a testament to their unwavering dedication. They preserve the original blood samples and tissue blocks in temperature-controlled evidence lot walkers. The cold storage units hum with electricity, guarding the biological keys to the mystery. Detectives recognize that traditional police work has reached its absolute operational limit. They wait for a technological breakthrough capable of bypassing the archaic missing persons databases. The dawn of the 21st century brings whispers of revolutionary genetic techniques. Law enforcement agencies begin tracking the rise of open-source genealogy as a potential investigative tool. The frozen blood samples in the Miami County locker sit ready for a process that will rewrite the rules of forensic science. The physical limits of traditional police work hit a hard wall. The calendar turns to 2018. A new scientific frontier opens. The DNA DOE project emerges as a fledgling initiative. Investigators package the biological evidence, they ship the vials from the Ohio precinct to specialized laboratories. The sterile white rooms of the lab hum with mechanical precision. Technicians extract microscopic genetic jet material from the preserved tissue. The raw data emerges as a string of complex code. This code holds the complete blueprint of a human life. The physical evidence transitions into a digital format. Scientists upload this genetic profile into open-source genealogy databases. The digital networks stretch across the globe. They connect millions of disparate family trees. The search begins. The system processes the markers. The digital search algorithm operates with blinding speed. The computer servers cross-reference the genetic sequence against thousands of civilian profiles. 37 years of manual police work condense into a matter of hours. The screen displays a hit. The genetic markers align perfectly with an established family tree. Researchers trace the branches. They follow the lineage through specific geographic regions. The digital trail bypasses the archaic paper records of the 1980s. It ignores state lines and jurisdictional boundaries. The connections narrow down to a single geographic point. The location data anchors itself in the American South. The coordinates point directly to a quiet residential neighborhood. The system identifies a direct familial link. The mystery collapses. The answer materializes on the computer monitor. The identity of the unknown traveler becomes an undeniable fact. The genetic trail terminates at a specific doorstep in Arkansas. The address belongs to the exact same house. The same heavy rotary telephone sits on the kitchen counter. The steadfast mother still resides within those walls. She has maintained her agonizing vigil for nearly 4 decades. The profound tragedy of the situation washes over the investigative team. Miami County detectives realize the immense scale of the systemic failure. They searched the entire nation for decades. They interrogated suspects and chased phantom leads across multiple states. Meanwhile, a mother waited in a state of suspended hope just a few states away. The predator who discarded her daughter relied on the fragmented law enforcement network to obscure his actions. He hid his crimes behind the bureaucratic walls of a disconnected system. The revelation shatters his assumed superiority. The geographic void between the victim and her family vanishes. The girl in the buckskin poncho reclaims her name. She is Marcia King. On April 11, 2018, the Miami County Sheriff holds a press conference. Journalists pack into the precinct briefing room. The flashing lights of cameras illuminate the space. Detectives step to the podium. They officially announce the true identity of the young woman to the public. The announcement ripples across news networks. The news reaches the quiet house in Arkansas. The mother receives the definitive answer she sought for 37 years. The heavy burden of endless waiting lifts from her shoulders. The crushing silence of the missing years gives way to undeniable reality. She learns the final destination of her transient daughter. The realization brings a profound, agonizing closure. The permanent tether she maintained to the past finally breaks. The physical house transforms from a waiting room back into a home. The mother honors the memory of her daughter with the absolute certainty of the truth. The decades of uncertainty dissolve forever. The successful identification completely resets the investigative timeline. The stagnant files reopen with renewed intensity. The specific perpetrator responsible for ending her journey remains unidentified. Detectives now possess the crucial starting point of her final route. They map the exact highways connecting Arkansas to Ohio. Investigators cross-reference the specific dates of her departure with historical suspect logs. They search for known predators operating along those exact interstate corridors in the early 1980s. The renewed focus aims to dismantle the camouflage of the unknown offender. Law enforcement agencies coordinate across state lines with unprecedented efficiency. The digital databases now support their efforts instead of hindering them. The cold case transitions into an active pursuit of accountability. The arrogant assumption of the predator faces a direct challenge. The system that once protected his anonymity now hunts his shadow. The quest for justice drives the current detectives forward. They vow to uncover the final piece of the puzzle. The most poignant victory occurs within the quiet grounds of Riverside Cemetery. The groundskeepers approach the final resting place of the nameless traveler. They remove the generic stone marker that stood for 37 years anew. Polished headstone takes its place upon the manicured grass. The engraved letters display her full name for all to see. The stone reads Marcia Sosoman King. This specific act of naming represents a monumental triumph for forensic genealogy. It proves that discarded identities can be reclaimed from the shadows. The community that protected her grave now mourns her true loss. Her restless spirit finds a permanent, acknowledged resting place. The case proves that specialized science can conquer decades of silence. Yet, the human desire to sever all ties and erase a past creates entirely different nightmares for investigators to unravel. Sometimes the absolute destruction of identity is a deliberate, methodical choice. On September 17, 2001, a motel maid in Amanda Park, Washington, turns the key to room 5. She pushes open the heavy door. She steps straight into an administrative black hole. On the morning of September 17, 2001, the heavy coastal fog clinging to Amanda Park, Washington, mirrored the grim discovery inside room 5 of the Quinault Inn. A motel maid pushed open the heavy wooden door, expecting to clean up after a transient guest, only to find a young man who had deliberately and permanently ended his own life. On the bedside table, a piece of paper bore a short, chilling message reading simply for the room, accompanied by the exact cash needed to cover the remainder of his stay. Investigators soon discovered that the young man had sliced every identifying tag out of his clothing and scrubbed all traces of his existence from his belongings. This profound, deliberate erasure of his identity plunged local law enforcement into one of the most perplexing administrative mysteries the Pacific Northwest had ever seen. Before the desolate motel room in Washington state claimed his final moments, the young man spent his life nestled within the sunny suburban sprawl of Alameda County, California. Alameda County sits on the eastern shores of the San Francisco Bay, characterized by winding neighborhoods, quiet cul-de-sacs, and a vibrant community that often masked the silent struggles of its residents. He grew up in a private yet loving household, shielded from the chaos of the larger metropolitan areas surrounding them. To the outside world, this 25-year-old blended into the tapestry of mid-90s California youth. He attended local schools, walked the familiar sun-drenched pavements, and participated in the mundane routines that define a secure adolescence. Neighbors and casual acquaintances saw a polite young man who never caused trouble or drew attention to himself. He possessed a calm demeanor, often keeping his thoughts compartmentalized behind a reserved smile. His family provided a stable foundation, unaware of the heavy shadows gathering behind his exterior. Underneath that surface-level normalcy, he wrestled with personal internal battles that he refused to share with anyone. He carried a massive emotional weight, suffering in silence while projecting an image of contentment. Mental anguish rarely broadcasts itself, and in his case, the facade remained impenetrable. Those closest to him saw only a thoughtful, introverted son who valued his privacy above all else. No one in his orbit could have ever predicted the dark path his thoughts were beginning to trace. The concept of him walking away from his entire life seemed impossible to anyone who knew his gentle nature. Throughout his early 20s, the gap between his outward reality and his internal despair grew wider. He maintained his daily routines, keeping up appearances while untethering himself from the connections that anchor a young adult to the world. He spent countless hours reading, retreating into literature, as a temporary escape from the psychological weight pressing down on his shoulders. One of those literary escapes would eventually provide him with the exact alias he would use to erase his true existence. His family believed he was finding his way, assuming his introversion remained a permanent fixture of his personality rather than a warning sign of profound distress. Parents of adult children often grant them space, and his family respected his need for quiet independence. They had no reason to suspect that his need for solitude served as careful preparation for a final irreversible departure. The tragedy of his situation lay in his ability to hide his pain from the people who loved him the most. He orchestrated his final days at home, ensuring nothing appeared out of the ordinary to the watchful eyes of his parents. He did not pack large suitcases, nor did he leave behind frantic notes detailing his internal agony. Instead, he made deliberate choices to detach himself from the warm environment of Alameda County. The warm California breeze provided a stark contrast to the cold, calculated decisions forming in his mind. He prepared to sever every familial tie, leaving his loved ones oblivious to the permanent void he was about to create. In the fading days of late summer in the year 2001, the young man initiated his devastating plan. He stepped away from his familiar California life, embarking on a massive journey northward along the rugged Pacific Coast Highway. The physical distance between the bustling Bay Area of Alameda County and the dense, misty forests of Washington State spans nearly 900 miles. As he traveled further away from the sunlit valleys of his youth, the landscape morphed into towering evergreens and perpetual overcast skies. He bypassed major cities, seeking out the kind of remote isolation that only the dense woodland around the Olympic Peninsula could provide. He carried very few possessions, having already decided that the life he lived back home had reached its permanent end. He arrived in Amanda Park, a tiny, secluded community situated right on the edge of Lake Quinault. The area features heavy rainfall, ancient trees, and a pervasive silence that swallows ambient noise. He walked into the small office of the Quinault Inn, a humble roadside motel offering cheap nightly rates and minimal questions. The clerk on duty saw a polite, unassuming traveler who appeared unremarkable among the typical drifters passing through the rural town. When the clerk slid the registration card across the counter, the young man reached for the pen to commit his final act of deception. He wrote down a fictional name, ensuring his actual family would remain disconnected from his final resting place. The name he scribbled onto the motel registry was Lyle Stevick, a specific choice that revealed the deep literary roots of his final plan. Lyle Stevick is not merely a random assortment of syllables, but a direct reference to a troubled character from a Joyce Carol Oates literary work. By adopting this obscure fictional moniker, he severed his true identity from the physical world long before taking his last breath. He paid for his lodging, took the heavy brass key for room 5, and closed the door on the outside world for the very last time. Inside the small, dimly lit room, he went to work dismantling any remaining links to his real life in California. He took a sharp blade to his own clothing, cutting away every single manufacturer tag that might hint at where he purchased his wardrobe. He disposed of his identification cards, stripping himself of the very documents that proved he existed as a citizen. He left no driver license, no social security card, and no personal letters that could provide authorities with a starting point. His actions demonstrated a chilling methodical desire to remain nameless forever, trapping his family in a permanent state of not knowing. He laid out the money to cover his final night, placed the brief message on the nightstand, and then carried out his tragic resolution. The silence of the isolated Washington woods wrapped around the motel, keeping his dark secrets safe until the morning light broke through the overcast sky. He orchestrated a total disappearance, leaving behind only the ghost of Lyle Stevick to confuse and frustrate the authorities who would soon arrive. When patrol vehicles from the Grays Harbor Sheriff Office arrived at the Quinault Inn, deputies encountered a meticulously sanitized environment. The motel sits along the winding Highway 101, surrounded by the dense canopy of the Olympic National Forest, creating a naturally isolated crime scene. Investigators stepped into Room 5 and began the slow process of cataloging every item left behind. The young man had left almost nothing of substance for the crime scene technicians to analyze. Technicians dusted the bedside table, the bathroom fixtures, and the heavy room key for fingerprints. They rolled the ink across his lifeless fingers, transferring his unique dermal ridges onto official 10 print cards. The medical examiner mapped the exact condition of his teeth, charting every filling and dental characteristic. Detectives felt confident that these concrete biological markers would quickly crack the mystery of his identity. They submitted the fingerprint cards and dental charts to national missing persons databases, expecting an immediate return. Instead, the automated systems delivered absolute silence. The digital queries bounced back with 0 matches across every available law enforcement network in the country. The Grays Harbor investigators stared at empty screens, realizing they possessed a perfect physical profile with no name attached to it. The young man had managed to slip completely outside the massive administrative net of the American justice system. The failure of the national databases stemmed from a heartbreaking, silent misunderstanding playing out nearly 900 miles away in California. For the database to trigger a match, a corresponding missing persons report must exist within the law enforcement network. His family in Alameda County never walked into a police precinct to file that crucial paperwork. They operated under the painful assumption that their son had simply estranged himself to start a brand new life. Adult children possess the legal right to sever contact, and police departments routinely reject missing person reports for adults who leave voluntarily. The family respected his desire for isolation, believing he walked the streets of a new city, far away from his childhood home. They held on to the hope that he would one day pick up a telephone and re-establish contact on his own terms, because they never reported him missing. No officer ever uploaded his medical records or physical description to the National Criminal Information Center. This rigid systemic requirement created an impassable void between the frantic search in Washington and the waiting family in California. The Grays Harbor investigators possessed the answers, while the family held the questions, yet the database structure kept the two sides entirely blind to one another. Detectives in Washington continued to chase shadows, unaware that the very foundation of their search was fundamentally flawed. The lack of a formal report transformed a standard identification case into an insurmountable bureaucratic wall. Seeking a different angle, investigators turned their attention to the single piece of written evidence left in the motel registry. The name Lyle Stevick stood out in the ledger, prompting detectives to search for anyone holding that legal identity in the Pacific Northwest. They combed through motor vehicle records, tax documents, and property deeds, finding absolutely no trace of a living citizen bearing that exact name. A crucial realization shifted the entire trajectory of the investigation when a detective traced the name back to an obscure piece of fiction. The name belonged to a character from a novel written by the author Joyce Carol Oates. Within the pages of that specific book, the fictional character wrestles with profound despair and contemplates ending his own life. This discovery hit the sheriff office like a physical blow, instantly transforming their best lead into a massive dead end. The name provided 0 geographical coordinates, 0 familiar connections, and 0 hints regarding his true origins. It served only as a grim psychological mirror, reflecting the heavy emotional state of the young man in his final hours. By choosing a literary figure trapped in a similar dark headspace, he effectively mocked the standard investigative procedures designed to track human movement. Detectives realized they were hunting a ghost who had deliberately chosen an alias that would lead them directly into a wall of fiction. The motel registry offered no breadcrumbs, only a profound statement of permanent departure. As the physical investigation stalled out within the damp confines of Grays Harbor County, the case files migrated into a radical new arena. The early 2000s marked a profound shift in how law enforcement distributed unidentified person bulletins. Detectives uploaded the stark post-mortem photographs and detailed physical descriptions to early internet databases and public message boards. This digital expansion pushed the mystery far beyond the towering evergreens of Washington state, exposing the case to millions of computer screens worldwide. Thousands of ordinary citizens, drawn to the tragedy of the nameless young man, formed massive digital communities dedicated to cracking the case. These web sleuths organized themselves into sprawling internet forums, creating entire websites devoted exclusively to analyzing the man in Room 5. They scrutinized every pixel of the released photographs, searching for microscopic clues that the seasoned detectives might have overlooked. The online community mapped out his facial structure, noting his distinct earlobes, his hazel eyes, and his dark hair. They functioned as a massive decentralized detective agency, dedicating thousands of uncompensated hours to cross-referencing high school yearbooks from across the country. They scoured digitized newspaper archives, hunting for obscure graduation announcements or local sports rosters that might feature a matching face. The sheer volume of human attention focused on this single isolated tragedy became a massive internet phenomenon. Yet, despite this unprecedented mobilization of public effort, the true identity remained locked away in the quiet California suburbs. The digital investigators focused heavy attention on the few physical items the young man failed to destroy inside the Quenote Inn. They analyzed the specific brand of his blue jeans, the exact stitching on his boots, and the generic style of his dark shirt. Web sleuths contacted tight-style manufacturers, attempting to trace the distribution routes of those specific garments to narrow down his geographic origin. They tracked the distribution of denim jeans and generic footwear, mapping out supply chains that stretched from the West Coast to the Midwest. Forum members engaged in fierce debates over his physical attributes, arguing over whether his appearance suggested a specific regional heritage. They generated hundreds of speculative leads, flooding the Grays Harbor Sheriff Office with phone calls and emails containing potential matches. Detectives dutifully logged every single tip, pulling physical files and making countless phone calls to verify the information. Investigators spent days tracking down runaway teenagers from Oregon, missing farmhands from Idaho, and estranged college students from British Columbia. Time after time, the detectives reached the parents of those missing men, only to find that the dental records did not match the remains resting in Washington. The relentless barrage of well-meaning but incorrect tips exhausted the limited resources of the rural sheriff department. Each false alarm brought a brief surge of hope, followed immediately by the crushing weight of another dead end. The digital crowd provided immense energy, but their efforts continually shattered against the flawless execution of the young man's disappearance. The years dragged on, turning a fresh crime scene into a cold, stagnant administrative file resting in the archives of Grays Harbor County. The physical evidence remained locked inside climate-controlled evidence boxes, while the digital forums continued to spin complex theories in the virtual world. Investigators rotated through the department, retiring or moving on to new cases, handing the heavy burden of the nameless man to the next generation of deputies. No one ever walked through the heavy glass doors of the sheriff office to claim the young man. No grieving mother called the local coroner to ask about a son who matched the physical description circulating on the internet. The silence from the public sector created a profound psychological toll on the detectives who refused to let the case go. They recognized the horrific tragedy of a human being effectively erasing his own existence from the fabric of society. The investigation hit a definitive wall, restricted by the technological limits of standard fingerprinting and basic dental comparisons. The forensic science of the era offered no further tools to pierce the veil of the fictional alias he had chosen. The young man from Alameda County remained perfectly hidden, his secret protected by the vast distance and the systemic flaws of the missing persons network. The case of the man in room 5 cemented itself as an unsolvable enigma, leaving investigators staring into a void that seemed impossible to bridge. The year 2018 arrived, bringing a profound shift in the landscape of forensic science. Inside the basement archives of the Grays Harbor Sheriff Office, dust gathered on the heavy banker boxes holding the Lyle Stevick file. 17 years of administrative failure sat heavily on those metal shelves. Traditional fingerprinting and dental records had yielded nothing but silence. But a new organization, the DNA Doe Project, reached out to the Washington authorities with a revolutionary proposal. This specialized group of genetic genealogists requested access to a tiny biological time capsule. When the medical examiner processed the young man in the year 2001, technicians had preserved a small vial of his blood, storing it safely inside a temperature-controlled evidence freezer. For nearly 2 decades, that microscopic sample waited in the dark. Now, laboratory specialists extracted the preserved DNA, completely bypassing the standard criminal databases that had failed the investigation for so long. They subjected the genetic material to whole genome sequencing. This highly advanced laboratory process mapped out hundreds of thousands of individual genetic markers, creating an incredibly dense, comprehensive biological blueprint of the nameless man. The science moved beyond simple identification. It mapped his deep ancestral origins. The genetic profile transitioned from the sterile laboratory into the digital realm. Genealogists uploaded the sequence data into public open-source ancestry databases, searching for ordinary citizens who shared overlapping segments of DNA. They did not need a direct parental match, they needed distant relatives. The database returned a vast web of second and third cousins scattered across the United States. The investigators went to work building massive family trees by mapping birth records, marriage certificates, and historical census data to trace the lineage backward to common ancestors. Once they established the historical grandparents, they reversed the exhaustive process. They traced the branches forward, following the family lines down through the decades, eliminating branches until the genetic coordinates pointed toward a single geographic locus. The winding digital trail led them straight back to the sunlit streets of Alameda County, California. The genealogists identified a specific family structure containing a son who matched the exact age and physical demographic profile of the man in room 5. The staggering truth emerged from the digital data. The answer had always existed 900 miles south, hidden behind a tragic lack of communication and a missing persons report that was never filed. Armed with the specific surname, investigators prepared to bridge the massive gap between the Washington woods and the California suburbs. Law enforcement officers in Alameda County received the urgent briefing. They navigated the quiet residential streets, pulling up to the exact child home the young man had abandoned 17 years prior. The officers approached the front door. They knocked on the heavy wood. The family answered. The parents stood face to face with authorities, completely unprepared for the devastating reality about to enter their home. Detectives delivered the news. The son they believed was alive. The son they thought was simply navigating a quiet, estranged existence somewhere in the world had died in a remote Washington motel almost 2 decades ago. The revelation shattered the family. Their long-held hope evaporated in an instant. The crushing weight of 17 years of misplaced optimism collapsed on them. The young man had succeeded in hiding his fate for nearly a generation, but the relentless march of genetic science finally breached his flawless disguise. The isolation he carefully constructed was dismantled, leaving his family to grapple with a profound, delayed grief. In May of the year 2018, the Grays Harbor County coroner received the definitive DNA confirmation from the laboratory. The genetic markers matched the family in Alameda County with absolute scientific certainty. The long, frustrating administrative mystery reached its definitive conclusion. Authorities prepared to announce the identification to the public, ready to close one of the most high-profile unidentified person cases in modern history. However, the family stepped forward with a poignant legal request. They asked the local authorities and the national media to completely withhold their son's true identity from the public record. They had just lost a child they thought was still living, and they needed to mourn in absolute privacy, shielded from the aggressive scrutiny of the outside world. Law enforcement officials made a rare compassionate decision. They honored the family wishes without hesitation. They refused to release the name, recognizing that the young man's deeply personal internal battles did not belong to the public domain. The sheriff's office prioritized human empathy over public curiosity, cementing a protective barrier around the grieving parents. The official announcement echoed across the massive digital landscape. The thousands of internet sleuths who had dedicated years of their lives to the mystery received the final update. The nameless man had a name, but they would never know it. In a remarkable display of digital grace, the vast online community respectfully stood down. The sprawling message boards locked their active threads. The dedicated websites shut down their servers. The web sleuths recognized that their primary mission of giving the young man back to his family had been fully accomplished. The intense fascination dissolved into respectful silence. The glaring public spotlight that had illuminated the young man for 17 years finally clicked off, allowing him to rest under his true name known only to those who truly loved him. Back in the rural confines of Amanda Park, the legacy of Room 5 transitioned from an active enigma into a closed historical record. The Grays Harbor Sheriff's Office stamped the heavy physical file with a definitive red seal, ending thousands of hours of exhausted police work. The bureaucratic loop finally closed. The profound tragedy of a quiet young man who sought permanent erasure ended with a profound act of familial reclamation. Yet, while genetic science managed to finally bring this lost son home to California, other forgotten victims still wait in the dark, trapped in mysteries stretching back even further into the past. Some administrative nightmares begin not with a fictional alias in a motel registry, but with a battered cardboard box abandoned in the damp, rural woodlands of 1950s Philadelphia. On the freezing afternoon of February 25, 1957, a young college student walking through the tangled, leafless woods of the Foxchase neighborhood makes a grim discovery. Hidden among the dormant winter brush sits a discarded cardboard bassinet box from a local J.C. Penney store. Inside, wrapped tightly in a faded, heavily patterned Indian blanket, lies the frail, severely malnourished body of a small boy. Responding officers arrive to find a scene that shatters the quiet suburban landscape. Realizing the child has suffered fatal blunt force trauma to the head, this solitary abandoned box initiates the most sprawling and frustrating unidentified person investigation in the history of Philadelphia. The city of Philadelphia in the 1950s hums with post-war prosperity and strict social conformity. Rows of uniform brick townhouses line the streets of West Philadelphia, where neighbors exchange pleasantries on front stoops and community ties bind tightly. The air carries the scent of industrial exhaust, mingling with the aroma of Sunday dinners roasting in small, crowded kitchens. Yet behind the neat facades and heavy wooden doors, rigid societal expectations govern every aspect of domestic life. Maintaining impeccable public image dictates the survival of a family name. A child born out of wedlock carries a heavy unspoken stigma, a mark of shame that threatens to unravel the carefully constructed reputation of two prominent local bloodlines. The prevailing culture of the era demands absolute discretion regarding family secrets. Unwed mothers face profound social ostracization, often forced to hide their pregnancies and surrender their infants to shadow networks of quiet arrangements. In this unforgiving environment, vulnerability thrives in silence. Born in January 1953, Joseph Agakis Zamerli enters this rigid world already cloaked in secrecy. The exact rhythms of his brief existence remain largely unrecorded by standard civic institutions, shielding his life from public view. Without baptismal announcements in the local parish bulletins or regular visits to community pediatricians, his footsteps leave no imprint on the bustling neighborhoods of West Philadelphia. A young boy in his developmental years typically brings noise, motion, and boundless curiosity to a household. Children of his age chase stray dogs down alleyways, draw chalk lines on the sidewalks, and clamor for attention at the local grocery store. Joseph experiences none of these ordinary milestones. The oppressive weight of his illegitimate status keeps him confined, hidden away from the probing eyes of neighbors and the formal record-keeping of municipal authorities. He lives a fleeting existence in the shadows of a major metropolis, a phantom child whose basic human needs depend entirely on a secret network of caretakers. This profound isolation strips him of a voice long before the tragic events of his final days. His isolation renders him exceptionally vulnerable to those trusted with his care. The strict social codes meant to uphold moral decency instead create a perfect blind spot for a helpless child. The physical environment surrounding his concealed life underscores the chilling reality of his situation. The sprawling city of Philadelphia offers countless corners where the forgotten slip through the cracks, from the dense industrial zones along the Delaware River to the quiet wooded outskirts in the north. The adults dictating his fate navigate this geography with deliberate caution, ensuring no official paper trail links his existence to their respected families. A boy requires routine sustenance, warm clothing, and basic medical care. Yet the logistics of providing these necessities for a hidden child demand constant deception. Someone embarches his meals, someone cuts his hair, and someone provides the small plaid blanket that will eventually become a vital piece of evidence. Every interaction with the outside world requires calculated risk management to maintain the facade of normalcy. The walls of his daily confinement absorb his voice, while the outside world remains entirely oblivious to his presence. The winter of 1957 descends upon the city with biting winds and plunging temperatures, freezing the landscape into a bleak tableau. During these cold months, the structural safeguards of child welfare fail completely, leaving Joseph entirely at the mercy of individuals desperate to maintain their social standing. The lack of routine civic engagement guarantees that when his routine shatters, no teachers, no neighbors, and no distant relatives raise an alarm. The northern edge of Philadelphia transitions abruptly from dense urban grids into sparse rural tracts of land. Susquehanna Road cuts through one such desolate area in the Fox Chase neighborhood, a narrow winding stretch bordered by thick trees and overgrown brush. During the bleak early months of 1957, this quiet stretch of road sees minimal traffic, illuminated only by the faint glow of distant streetlights. The rugged terrain provides ample cover for anyone seeking to discard unwanted secrets under the veil of darkness. Sometime during this frigid period, the brief life of Joseph Agakis Zamerli meets a violent and permanent end. The boy endures catastrophic physical abuse, sustaining multiple severe impacts to the head that ultimately extinguish his life. Instead of seeking medical intervention or reporting an accidental injury, The responsible parties make a calculated decision to erase him completely. They sever his thick, light brown hair in a haphazard manner, attempting to alter his appearance while clumps of hair remain clinging to his lifeless body. They wrap his frail, bruised frame tight in a faded Indian-patterned blanket, binding him like a discarded parcel. Transporting the remains in the trunk of a vehicle, they navigate the dark corridors of the city north toward the desolate woods. Upon reaching the edge of Susquehanna Road, they drag a sturdy cardboard Penney bassinet box into the thicket, depositing the child inside to face the freezing elements alone. The perpetrators flee the scene, confident that a child who never officially existed can never be missed. The discovery of the box shatters this illusion of a perfect crime, setting off an unprecedented law enforcement response. Upon arriving at the wooded scene, veteran patrolmen stare in disbelief at the tiny, malnourished figure, noting the extensive bruising that maps a tragic history of neglect and trauma on his skin. The crime scene technicians descend upon the frozen terrain, meticulously documenting the location of the box, the positioning of the blanket, and the scattered strands of hair. Investigators immediately fan out across the city, assuming a frantic search for the parents will yield quick results. The established police protocol relies heavily on distraught parents contacting precincts to report a missing child. The detectives wait by the phones, expecting a flood of inquiries from panicked mothers and fathers searching for a 4-year-old boy with distinctive blue eyes and recent surgical scars on his ankle and groin. Days pass with agonizing slowness as the phones remain dead silent. The commanding officers expand the search perimeter, contacting neighboring jurisdictions across Pennsylvania and New Jersey to cross-reference every active missing persons file. They scour through stacks of carbon copy reports, scanning for any child matching the precise physical description of the boy found in the woods. Every single inquiry hits a solid brick wall. No family members step forward to claim his remains, no neighbors report a sudden absence, and no civic authority registers a missing student. This deafening silence confirms the investigators' worst fears, revealing a systemic failure that allowed a vulnerable child to vanish into thin air without a single voice demanding answers. The initial silence from the public forces investigators to deploy unprecedented identification tactics. Detectives realize traditional methods hold zero power against such profound societal secrecy. The medical examiner prepares a post-mortem photograph of the child. Officers dress the boy in standard clothing and position him to look like a resting, living child. The police department prints 400,000 flyers bearing this haunting image. The media dubs the victim the boy in the box, creating a moniker that echoes across the globe. Patrolmen staple these stark posters to wooden telephone poles along every major city avenue. Squad cars deliver stacks of these flyers to local gas stations, corner bakeries, and suburban grocery stores. The Philadelphia Gas Works includes a copy of the photograph inside every single utility bill mailed to local residents. Investigators map out a grid of the Delaware Valley, hoping saturation tactics will trigger a memory. They assume a resident of the community holds the key to the hidden existence of the child. The sheer volume of distribution guarantees the image reaches the breakfast tables of the specific people responsible for his fate. Yet the strategy yields nothing but a torrent of useless tips. Citizens flood the precinct's switchboard with descriptions of neighbors moving away or stray children playing near the woods. Officers run down every lead, knocking on doors and interviewing countless confused parents. The influx of false sightings forces the detective squad to pivot their focus toward the physical evidence recovered at the scene. The primary suspect items include the discarded cardboard container and the faded patterned blanket. Investigators trace the bassinet box to a specific J.C. Penney store located in Upper Darby, a township bordering the western edge of the city. Detectives interview the store manager and confiscate paper sales records for every single customer who purchased that specific item. Officers visit 14 different households, inspecting nurseries and verifying the presence of living infants in each home. This exhaustive retail trace hits an unbreakable wall, providing zero links to the unidentified boy. The forensic team turns their attention to the Indian trade blanket, analyzing the distinct weave and dye patterns. Textile experts determine the blanket went into mass production, rendering it untraceable to any individual buyer. The department orders a sweeping review of regional orphanages, foster care systems, and maternity wards. Plainclothes detectives walk the halls of institutional homes, comparing the faces of resident children to the photograph in their hands. They review dusty admission logs from private Catholic hospitals and state-run pediatric clinics. Law enforcement officials discover profound gaps in the record-keeping practices of the era. Informal adoption networks operate without state oversight, leaving immense blind spots in the municipal paperwork. The investigators hit another dead end, trapped by a bureaucratic system that allows a vulnerable child to vanish. The seasons change, turning the frozen woods of Fox Chase into a humid, overgrown thicket, while the identity of the boy remains obscured. The case file swells with hundreds of unverified theories overwhelming the storage capacity of the precinct. A massive shift occurs when a woman known in police records as AM presents herself to authorities with a sensational narrative. She provides detectives with a detailed confession, claiming her mother purchased the unnamed boy from another family. According to her statement, the boy endured severe mistreatment inside their home for 2 full years. She describes specific acts of physical trauma inflicted in a house located in the wealthy suburbs of Lower Merion. The woman offers chilling details regarding his final evening, recounting a fatal incident involving a bathtub. Investigators notice her testimony contains restricted facts about the stomach contents of the child and the distinct cut of his hair. The detectives map the distance between Lower Merion and the woods of Susquehanna Road, validating the route for a nighttime disposal. Law enforcement officers mobilize to corroborate this dark account, reviewing property records and conducting background checks. They locate the former residence and attempt to trace the movements of the mother during the winter of 1957. The investigation encounters a frustrating legal hurdle, as the mother perished many years before the confession. Investigators search for external verification, interviewing neighbors and seeking medical records for the house in question. Not a single person in the neighborhood recalls seeing a small, battered boy residing on the premises. The psychiatric history of the witness surfaces, revealing a complex web of severe mental health challenges. The commanding officers demand concrete, physical proof of her claims, yet the old residence yields zero forensic evidence. Lacking verifiable proof, the department classifies the confession as a historic dead end, closing this promising avenue of investigation. The massive binders of the investigation transition from the desks of original detectives to the hands of a new generation. The original investigators retire, surrendering boxes of yellowing paper and fading black and white photographs. New recruits inherit the sprawling case file, facing a mountain of outdated leads and verified rumors. The physical evidence remains locked inside the evidence room, degrading with each passing decade. The culture of the police department shifts, adopting modern procedures and computerized record systems. Detectives digitize the old typewritten reports, creating an electronic database for the sprawling investigation. The officers run the original fingerprints of the boy through regional and national computer systems. The rigid protocols of the mid-20th century failed to establish a centralized genetic registry, leaving modern investigators with a profound disadvantage. The identity of the child remains trapped in the analog era, hidden beneath layers of missing documentation. Dedicated officers spend their weekends reviewing the original autopsy reports, searching for missed clues in the medical terminology. They trace the lineage of the J.C. Penney box a second time, hoping new retail records might surface in corporate archives. The corporate search yields the exact same frustrating results, confirming the unbreakable anonymity of the purchase. The decades stack upon one another, transforming a frantic search into a solemn institutional obsession. The local cemetery groundskeepers maintain the grave of the unknown boy, replacing faded artificial flowers as a quiet tribute. The relentless march of scientific progress forces a profound shift in forensic strategy during the late 1990s. Biological identification techniques reach a level of sophistication capable of extracting distinct genetic markers from degraded materials. The investigative team secures a court order for the exhumation of the boy in 1998. The physical geography of the operation centers on Ivy Hill Cemetery, a sprawling, manicured resting place located in the Mount Airy neighborhood. Heavy machinery arrives at the quiet burial plot, breaking the earth and retrieving the sealed casket from the damp soil. Forensic anthropologists transport the remains to a sterile laboratory environment for immediate processing. Scientists focus on the decaying bones of the child, attempting to pull viable genetic material from the marrow. The extraction process poses a severe technical challenge due to the advanced state of decomposition and decades of ground moisture. Laboratory technicians apply specialized chemical washes to the bone fragments, fighting against the natural degradation of the biological matter. The exhaustive scientific effort produces a partial DNA profile, a crucial piece of the genetic puzzle. Detectives upload this new biological signature into vast state and federal criminal databases. The system initiates a comparative search, scanning millions of convicted offenders and missing persons records for a familial match. The computer screen returns a blank result, confirming the absence of any close relatives in the justice system. The strict privacy laws of the era prevent law enforcement from accessing private medical or civilian genetic registries. The failure of traditional criminal databases leaves the case stagnant for another 20 years. Forensic genealogy emerges as a groundbreaking tool during the first decade of the new millennium, offering a new path through commercial ancestral platforms. The partial DNA profile attained in the 1990s lacks the structural integrity required for modern genealogical mapping. Investigators realize they require a pristine, high-density biological sample to unlock the ancestral lineage of the child. The police department coordinates a second historic exhumation in the year 2019. The technicians return to Ivy Hill Cemetery, opening the grave a second time to retrieve the small casket. The forensic team employs cutting-edge extraction protocols targeting specific sections of the skull and long bones. Advances in genetic science allow researchers to build a comprehensive biological blueprint from the fragile remains. Scientists secure a robust DNA sample, capturing a detailed map of the distinct genetic markers of the boy. Law enforcement agencies face profound legal and bureaucratic hurdles regarding the use of civilian ancestry databases. Detectives navigate strict jurisdictional conflicts and complex privacy protocols to upload the new profile. The comparative process relies on private citizens submitting their own genetic material to commercial websites. Traditional investigative avenues remain barren, offering zero clues about the specific family tree. The boy remains locked in profound anonymity, a ghost trapped within a complex web of data and silent bloodlines. The massive investigative machine stands on the precipice of a revelation, waiting for a single microscopic connection. The physical landscape of the investigation shifts from the damp soil of Ivy Hill Cemetery to the sterile, climate-controlled laboratories of modern genetic genealogists. In the year 2022, highly trained forensic experts sit before banks of glowing monitors utilizing the pristine DNA profile extracted from the remains. They upload this complex biological blueprint into specialized databases, initiating a sweeping search across thousands of digital family trees. The computer algorithms connect the child to a vast network of distant cousins scattered across the country. Genealogists map out the maternal and paternal lines, tracing generations of census records, marriage certificates, and draft cards. The investigators narrow their focus to the city of Philadelphia, tracing the ancestral footprint back to the mid-20th century. They construct massive, intricate charts on their office walls, linking various branches of local families together. The analytical process demands intense precision, forcing researchers to eliminate false leads and document every single familial tie. The intricate genetic web eventually points toward a specific intersection between two prominent, well-established local bloodlines. Detectives realize they are gazing at the hidden architecture of a monumental generational secret. The sprawling family structures reveal a deliberate erasure of a single, fragile life. After 65 years of impenetrable darkness, the science of genetic genealogy finally pierces the veil of suburban anonymity. Armed with this precise ancestral map, detectives march into the municipal archives of Philadelphia to scour the dusty ledgers of vital statistics. They comb through endless rows of historical birth records from the early 1950s, searching for a child born exactly where these two distinct bloodlines cross. The relentless bureaucratic excavation finally yields a fragile paper document, a birth certificate hidden deep within the city vaults. The faded ink on the municipal form shatters a half-century of impenetrable silence, recording the arrival of a child in January 1953. Independent genealogical research conducted over the following months solidifies this staggering discovery, unearthing the true identities of the unwed parents. The documents name Augustus John Zarelli and Mary Elizabeth Plunkett, two individuals entrenched in a society that demanded absolute moral perfection. Both parents passed away long before the genetic breakthrough, carrying the immense weight of their concealed truth to the grave. Investigators analyze the rigid social dynamics of the era, recognizing how the profound stigma of an illegitimate pregnancy dictated a culture of absolute suppression. The child never stood a chance against the formidable walls of family pride and public reputation. The realization dawns on law enforcement officers that the boy hiding inside the cardboard box was not a discarded drifter, but a native son of their own city. The perpetrators relied on the impenetrable armor of prominent social standing to mask a horrific permanent betrayal. The complex illusion of a victimless crime collapses under the weight of undeniable biological truth. The heavy wooden doors of the Philadelphia Police Department headquarters open to a flood of journalists and camera crews on the morning of December 8, 2022. The crowded press room hums with intense anticipation, illuminated by the harsh glare of television lighting and the rapid flash of camera lenses. The police commissioner steps to the wooden podium, holding a pristine manila folder containing the most coveted answer in the history of local law enforcement. He leans into the microphone and speaks the name Joseph Augustus Zarelli, broadcasting the stolen identity of the boy to a global audience. The announcement echoes through the crowded hall, replacing the moniker of the boy in the box with the dignity of a human being. A profound sense of relief washes over the veteran detectives standing at the back of the room, men and women who carried the haunting post-mortem photograph in their wallets for decades. The commanding officers clarify that while the decades-long mystery of his identity is solved, the pursuit of justice remains active. The investigation into the exact individuals who inflicted the fatal trauma transitions into an open, ongoing homicide case. Detectives continue to pursue surviving relatives and hidden associates, determined to expose the final layer of this generational cover-up. The sheer passage of time presents an immense legal hurdle, yet the department refuses to close the binder on the violent end of his life. The restoration of his name serves as a powerful testament to the unwavering dedication of a law enforcement community that simply refused to forget. The quiet grounds of Ivy Hill Cemetery provide a stark contrast to the media frenzy unfolding downtown, returning the focus to the solemn reality of the victim. For 65 years, A granite stone bearing the inscription "America's Unknown Child" marked the lonely resting place under the shade of ancient oak trees. Following the monumental identification, stonemasons arrive at the burial plot with heavy chisels and grinding tools to correct a monumental historic wrong. They carve the letters of Joseph Agoka Zibarelli deep into the dark stone, anchoring his true identity to the physical world. The fresh, sharp grooves in the granite capture the afternoon sunlight, symbolizing the end of a dark, grueling journey through bureaucratic failures and societal indifference. Visitors now arrive at the manicured plot to leave small toys and fresh flowers for a boy they finally know by name. The tragic reality of his stolen future remains a permanent scar on the history of the city, a brutal reminder of the dangers lurking behind closed suburban doors. His restored dignity stands as a towering victory for forensic science and the stubborn resolve of truth seekers. The shadows that once concealed his existence have been eradicated by the relentless pursuit of justice. Yet, the disturbing phenomenon of hidden identities extends far beyond the borders of Philadelphia. Across the country, another seemingly perfect community harbors an even darker secret, where an elite professional utilized his respected position to mask a trail of unimaginable terror. These 5 stories prove that the truth is patient. No matter how meticulously a crime is hidden, it only takes one tiny branch on a family tree to bring those walls crashing down. While these individuals finally have their names back, thousands still wait in silence. Thank you for watching. Please click the video on screen for another deep dive.